He almost missed the line at the bottom of the card. The room smelled like toast and Father's Day felt like a sweater you've worn 100 times, soft, unremarkable, until he read, P.S. Look at me after reading the card. When he looked up, Brooke's fingers found the zipper of her hoodie and the world shifted on its hinge. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Prologue. The teeth of the zipper made a low, plastic whisper. It was June 21st. Sunlight poured across the kitchen tiles in a crooked rectangle where the curtains didn't quite meet. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower droned. The clock on the microwave blinked 0904 in a steady blue heartbeat. And in the small, warm kitchen of a terrace house in Shrewsbury, a 7-year-old pulled open her sweater and showed a man a question he didn't know he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. Will you adopt me? The words weren't typed. They were ironed on letters, carefully aligned, a little tilted, letters a child's patient hands had helped arrange one by one, like tiny doors set straight, a home built with fabric and bravery. The T-shirt was white, the question sky blue. Brooke stood with her shoulders back and her chin lifted as if any quiver between her and the day might make the letters fall off. Andy felt the air thin. He tried to swallow, but his throat had gone to sawdust. Tears came before he could pretend he might be strong enough to stop them. He didn't have days like this growing up, days that opened without warning and rewrote you. Yet here was one, spilling over him like sunlight, like apology, like an answer full of questions. Will you, will you, will you? He didn't trust his voice, so he breathed instead in time with the second hand ticking above the kettle, trying not to fall. It didn't work. He fell anyway into the way her hand shook, into the light on the blue letters, into the small gap between Step and Dad where all his courage gathered, kicked its shoes off, and finally came home. Chapter 1. 4 weeks of secret. 4 weeks earlier, Vicky had set the idea down on the kitchen table between a pair of scissors and a lukewarm cup of tea. It had come to her late, after she'd tucked 3 bodies under 3 quilts, after the television had shown hospital ward footage and a map with numbers, after she'd stood at the sink long enough to feel her own reflection shrink and grow with the steam. Andy's good, her mum had said on the phone. He's good the way some men aren't. He chooses you all every day. Vicky had smiled into the receiver, into the washing up water. He treats all the kids the same, no matter what. There were other things she did not say out loud because they made her feel like someone who didn't deserve them. That when Sapphire turned 1, Andy cried at the cake being lopsided. That when the car failed its MOT, he handled the mechanic as if it was a dog you calm with a voice. That when Brooke asked him to check for monsters, he didn't switch on the overhead light and look in all the closets. He knelt on the carpet and said in a low, solemn voice, I'll be honest, I've punched every monster that's ever thought about this room in the nose. And Brooke laughed so hard she hiccuped. They were small things and they were how you knew. You're doing the right thing, Mum had said. If she's asking, if he's ready. That was the question that pressed like a thumbprint on Vicky's thoughts, readiness. Not his willingness, she didn't doubt that, but there were practicalities. COVID had taken the calendar and shaken it like a rug. Courts were slow, offices were empty, processes became syllables you clicked your tongue around and never quite said. Would he feel like she was pushing him into paperwork when the world itself felt like thin ice? Let's make it a question, she'd told Brooke. Let's make it a moment. Brooke had swung her feet at the table, heels scuffing the chair rung in nervous rhythm. Like a movie, Vicky smiled. But in our kitchen, on Father's Day. Brooke's eyes had widened, 2 coins of hope dropped into a fountain. She had learned by then to collect hope in small, careful piles. It hadn't always been given to her with 2 hands and eye contact. It had been something she scavenged, put in her pocket, checked again for safety. A secret, she'd whispered. A secret. Vicky had glanced at the living room, where Corey's voice was rising in the syncopation of a 5-year-old explaining a video game to a 3-year-old brother, and Sapphire was toddling, a tiny planet of chaos drawing cups and crayons into orbit. She lowered her voice. Only you can keep it, love. The boys will tell Andy before breakfast if they know. I can see it now, Dad. Wait till you see the thing on the... Brooke had slapped a palm over her mouth, eyes gleeful. Me, she'd said stoutly. You can trust me. I know. They planned in whispers. Vicky ordered a plain white T-shirt online. her phone stories full of shipping delays. They bought letters from a craft shop that had reopened with tape on the floor and handwritten signs, promising masks required and patience appreciated. Brooke wrote out the words on a scrap of paper first, the pencil lines soft and tentative like she was asking a question even of the ink. "Will you adopt me?" she read aloud, biting her lip over adopt, the D swinging, the P rising. What if he says no? Vicky stilled her daughter's hand with her own, two pulses meeting. If he needed time, he'd ask for it. If he didn't feel right about it, he'd tell us gently, and then we'd keep loving him and he'd keep loving you the same as yesterday and the day after. He has never run when it's hard. Some people run, Brooke said matter-of-factly. The room took a breath. Yes, Vicky said quietly. Some people do. That night, after Brooke had fallen asleep with her hair spread on the pillow like a promise, Vicky sat on the carpet and worked the iron across the white cotton. Brooke watched with a conspirator's attention, her face sunlit by the lowering lamp. Each letter warmed and sealed under the care of that hot rectangle, each adhesive dot surrendering to heat. It felt like building a door that might open into a better room. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. Brooke brought the T-shirt to her chest, pressing it like a comforter. "It's perfect," she whispered. Vicky looked at the letters, slightly skewed over the tiny curve of the child-sized torso. The imperfection made the words truer. Love was always a little crooked. "Hide it well," she said. Brooke hid it between dresses in her wardrobe, behind a blue cardigan she only wore when Vicky insisted and the rain had decided to be biblical. She checked it every day for 4 weeks, like you check your pulse when a shock has rattled you and you need to reassure your body that your heart still lives there. Twice, nearly undone, she nearly told. Once when Andy broke a glass and apologized to it out of habit, and she laughed so hard she put her face into his T-shirt to stifle it and inhaled the smell of him. Laundry powder, son. Something warm like dogs in summer. "What are you hiding, monkey?" he teased, tickling her ribs. She had pressed her mouth shut like a vault door. The second time, Corey had marched up to Andy with his hands in fists and his chest big with an announcement. "We have," he started, and Vicky had swooped like a seagull from the kitchen, stuffed a grape in his mouth and said, "We have grapes." "Grapes," Corey said, bewildered and delighted. Vicky had met Brooke's eyes over Corey's head, both of them trying not to grin. Only Brooke was in on the surprise. Because if you wanted to keep a secret in a house with 3 small children and a pandemic pressing its weight onto every open window, you gave the secret to the one who had learned to keep herself safe. Chapter 2. The man who stayed Andy Griffiths had never planned to be anyone's hero. He worked with his hands and believed in fixing what could be fixed and admitting what couldn't. He turned 29 2 months before the zipper in the kitchen. He wore his hair a little too long because Vicky said she liked it, and he pretended he didn't. He said tea, in a way that made it a hug. He measured his days in small jobs and small laughs, and the way the world had been turned inside out by a virus made him double down on the ordinary in the way some men doubled down on the extraordinary. He washed his hands till the skin chapped. He queued with mask and patience. He kept the children busy with elaborate castles made from cereal boxes and toilet roll holders. All 4 kids called him by name, but Brooke had been the first to call him something else once by accident. It had been a winter afternoon, the kind where the sky seems to be 3 floors above the street and only grudgingly there. She had had a fever, not serious, but the kind that makes a child dangerous to herself with exhaustion. He'd sat next to her on the sofa with a bowl in case, his hand on her tiny rib cage counting the rises. When she woke and found him exactly where she'd left him, her eyes had glazed with relief, and she said, easy as blinking, "Dad," and fell asleep again. He had not moved for 20 minutes. He was certain if he shifted even to scratch his nose, the word would spook and fly into a corner. He had grown up with a man who said he would be home by 8 and came home by someday. It had carved him into a person who did things when he said he would. He had learned to change a tire when he was 16, and his mother's car was stuck in the rain on the edge of town, and the men at the garage said they were closing. He had learned to keep coins for the bus in an old toffee tin, because money is a thing you can look at and plan round, and love is many things but not always one of them. He had learned that if you can't find a hero, you can be a kind one. When he met Vicky, she was standing by a shelf of cereal in the Asda, staring at the boxes like someone who knows all cereal is sugar in a different coat and can't afford to pretend. She was laughing a bit at herself, and the laugh made him want to know what else she thought was funny and what she cried at when it was midnight and nobody had asked her to be brave for a couple of hours. He didn't so much fall in love as notice he was already lying down in the grass, and the stars were above him. Brooke had watched him from behind Vicky's legs for weeks. She wore a small frown, as if anyone coming in the door had to pass a test she set. He passed it slowly. He never forced the jokes. He didn't overpraise the drawings. He asked questions about the horses she lined up carefully on the windowsill and remembered which one had the missing ear. He never took her mum out without checking if Brooke had a plan for dinner. He learned the exact noise the front gate made when it was latched and checked it like clockwork. He never flinched when the boys clattered into him like a rogue wave. He learned to be still enough to be trusted. "Do you think you could stay?" Brooke had asked him once at bedtime, a year into him being in the house, when the night rain made soft tick-tick-tick on the window. He'd known what she meant and had answered it with the only honest thing, "I hope to," which was a promise that didn't pretend the weather couldn't shift. In March, everything shifted. Shrewsbury went quiet except for the birds and the sirens. River Severn kept minding her own looping business. Vicky drew rainbows with the kids and taped them to the window with clumsy hope. They clapped at 8 for carers with the neighbors, pots, and wooden spoons making a rough orchestra. They learned new words they'd never wanted to know and new fears they had no use for. Andy was furloughed for a while. He made bread, and it was terrible. He made it again, and it wasn't. He didn't talk about wanting to be a father. He simply was one in the ways you are when nobody's making a film of it. He tied laces. He measured cowpaw. He got down on the kitchen floor and built train tracks that would fail a planning permit but delighted their single user. He was stern when it mattered and daft when it mattered, and he listened when it mattered. "I treat all the kids the same," he said once when Vicky put her head on his shoulder and said she was scared she'd broken Brooke somehow by not being able to make other people better than they were. "No matter what. And they treat me like a trampoline." "You are good trampoline," Vicky said, and he laughed with the kind of relief that makes you light. Brooke watched him. Children learn in the sideways glances of adults. They learn in the pauses more than the pronouncements. She learned that even on the days he was tired and short, he apologized before she had to. She learned that when she drew him with a blue crayon and stuck it on the fridge with unmatched magnets, he looked at it long enough to see himself in it and then said, "You've made me handsome. Don't tell my mum or she'll disagree." She learned that once, when she woke from a nightmare about the river turning into a road and nobody seeing her wave, he went downstairs and made cocoa, and when she asked if he had nightmares, he said, "Ah, love, yes." And when she asked, "Do you tell them to go away?" he said, "I make them a chair and a cuppa and ask them what they want. They get bored and leave eventually," and she believed him. And that's why, when she held the T-shirt up against her chest in the half-dark with Vicky, those blue letters were not simply a question but a naming. They were her saying to the house, to the father-shaped air, "I know who you are. I know who I am when you're here." Chapter 3, Cards, Threads, and P.S. The card Brooke made was heavy with glitter glue and determination. She'd asked Vicky how to spell one word, and Vicky had guessed, and then Brooke had snapped, "No, that one," and written "favorite" with the U and a flare that made it look like confetti. "Dear Andy," it said on the front, with a drawing of a stick man and 4 stick kids in a row and a stick woman who had hair like fireworks. "You are my favorite fun. Thank you for fixing my horse's ear. Thank you for smashing the monster. Thank you for toast at midnight and letting me stir things and reading 4 pages even when you say just 3. I love you." At the bottom, in smaller letters that she went slow on, she wrote, "P.S. Look at me after reading the card." Between the card stock and the envelope, she pressed a daisy. Vicky had asked, "What's that for?" And Brooke had said, "From the first day of us." She meant last spring, when Andy had run after her balloon when it slipped from her fingers by the quarry, dodging kids in wellies and couples who thought they were invisible, jumping taller each time to bat the string down from the cherry branch. The balloon's writing had been worn by sun to a pale bruise. When he reached it, he didn't pop it to teach a lesson or tie it down tight like a warning. He handed it back with a bow and said, "I'm afraid it still has plans of its own," and Brooke had looked at her mother as if the world had just introduced itself again and said it was good to meet her. "I kept it," she said now, about the daisy. I knew it would be needed. Father's Day came. The morning was a parade of small collisions and outsized love. Corey woke the house at 6 by putting a toy trumpet to Andy's ear. Charlie ran into a doorframe and conducted himself with the dignity of a rugby player. Sapphire threw toast and was deeply surprised each time gravity did the one thing it had always promised to do. Vicky moved through them all like a conductor whose orchestra had replaced their instruments with hedgehogs. Everyone wash hands before breakfast, Andy said, and then, also after, and then, also again. There were cards from the boys that said best da, and to Andy, and bzzzzz accompanied by wobbly bees. There was a cheap mug with world's okayest dad that Vicky had bought because she knew it would make him laugh like a man colluding with the universe. Brooke hung back, her arms wrapped around herself, the zip of the hoodie high at her neck despite the heat. Her hair was in 2 plaits, a Vicky special that looked slightly dangerous but came undone if you breathed. She watched the clock with the intensity of a person waiting for a train that might decide not to arrive, and then the moment was there, and it didn't feel like a moment at all, just the next breath in. She went to him and held out the card like an object of state. He gave it the reverence it asked. He opened it with care, read aloud in the low voice he used with stories, unclipping his heart word by word from where it had been fastened all these years. He took in the glitter and the wonky hearts, the little drawing where she had given him enormous arms like a superhero or someone who could carry groceries and dreams in the same hand. And then he saw the P.S. Something happened to his face when he read it. It was a thing Brooke would remember, the way a child remembers a look and not a speech, the way we keep expressions far longer than we keep the context that birthed them. He lifted his eyes. She reached for the zipper. Chapter 4, Father's Day I. It was the only thing Andy said, the one broken syllable that contained a lifetime of I didn't know, I hoped, I'm terrified, and yes. She pulled the hoodie apart quick, like she was letting a wild thing out. Underneath, the white cotton was bright and plain. The letters curled a little at the corners from the iron and the hiding. Will you adopt me? He sat hard on the chair like his legs had decided he couldn't be trusted to stay upright. He put his hand to his mouth, and it didn't disguise anything, not the way his lip pressed, not the tears that were there without ceremony. People imagine crying is always loud, but there's a version of it that is an implosion, gentle and seismic. When it comes, it leaches color from the air for a second and then gives it back with interest. That is what happened to the kitchen. Vicky stood by the counter and watched the two of them like someone who has fought past many doors to reach this room. She was ready to say, no pressure, ready to say, we know the legal stuff is a faff, ready to say, take your time, ready to say all the things a woman says when she has asked for the world and is also asking you to help her carry it, but she didn't have to say anything. Brooke took a step forward. Her chin wobbled, dignity fighting with fear. She held very still, like a soldier being presented with a medal. It delighted her, the idea of medals, and terrified her too, someone noticing you enough to tap your shoulder and pin a weight there is a glorious and haywire thing. He stood, he wiped his cheeks with the heel of his hand. He lowered himself, a man bending to the altar of a child's height. He put his hands on her shoulders and felt the bone there, the bird fragile knob that housed everything that was her. He said, yes. The word was quiet, but it cracked something open in him and maybe in the house. Yes, and for all the days behind it. Yes, and for the documents ahead. Yes, like a key turning. Yes, like a dog who has decided you are its person. Yes, like a vow. Brooke lunged and wrapped her arms around his neck, and the laugh that burst out of her was an animal world away from any cry she'd ever made. It was the sound people make when the thing they asked for did not turn out to be a joke. She pushed her face into his collarbone, and he made a sound that wasn't a word at all. Corey, not understanding but understanding enough, cheered. Charlie clapped because his brother had cheered. Sapphire tried to bite the corner of the T-shirt and then, disappointed, went back to her toast. Vicky pressed her hands to her face and felt mascara collect, and for once didn't care what she looked like at all. They stayed like that. Then they eased into the rest of the day, but the day was not what it had been. The mug was funnier, the sausages were saltier, the air was cleaner, the news was the news, numbers and graphs, but the graph inside their house had leapt and drawn a line upward that nothing could make straight again. Will we go today? Brooke asked, practical. To adopt, to do the papers. Ah, love. Andy's heart had slid in his chest. He glanced at Vicky, and Vicky shook her head just a fraction, a silent, "I've got this." "We'll do it as soon as we can," she promised, kneeling in someone else's cereal. "Because of the virus, the offices are doing only emergencies right now. We have to wait until it's safe, but we'll start the phone calls tomorrow. We'll fill in the forms as far as they go." Brooke blinked. She had lived long enough to know the shape of waiting, but the idea of waiting for this thing seemed like asking someone on a ship to sit tight while the harbor came closer entirely on its own. "It's not a no," Andy said, because he knew what no did to a child's hunger. "It's the biggest yes I've ever said. It's a yes and when." The phrase delighted her. "Yes and when," she repeated like a spell. Later, Vicky asked if she could post the video. "You don't have to," she said, trying to read him, this man who had just been handed his whole heart in a simple cotton shirt. "It's ours, it can stay ours." He thought about it. "If we share it," he said, "it might remind someone who's running to stop, or someone who's waiting that it's not crazy to ask. It's not for praise, it's for I don't know, for the ring of it, for the sound of yes, we've had enough no." She posted it. His voice was a whisper in the clip. The letters on the t-shirt were a little wonky, and the views came like weather. In an hour, 1,000. In a day, 100,000. In a week, Vicky's phone was a piece of cutlery in a drawer of fireworks. The comments were messy and human. Some said, "I cried," and "congratulations." And there's good in the world after all. A few said sour things that smelled of envy. Most said more than they had ever said to strangers and felt lighter after. Andy read some at the kitchen table, his tea going cold. He was surprised to find that the ones that hooked his lungs were the men. "I never had a dad. Be one for me, and my mum told me I was lucky to have a roof. You've made me want to give a ceiling to someone else." The reaction, he told Vicky, the word stiff in his mouth as if he wasn't used to being the reason people reacted, and some of the comments overwhelming. "What did you expect?" she said, kissing his shoulder. "People love a man crying when it's about something that matters." That night, when they all finally slept, he went into the living room and looked at the t-shirt where it lay on the back of the chair like a flag after a parade. He touched the letters. He imagined a courtroom he'd never been in, which was a room like any other but with special chairs. He pictured Brooke between them, hair in two plaits like danger ropes. He wondered if he would be expected to cry then. He suspected yes. Chapter 5. After the video, they started the process in the morning, as promised. Vicky made phone calls. There were forms that wanted to know his blood type and the shape of his patients and all the addresses he'd ever lived at, which made him think of kitchens where he'd learned to be tidy and rooms where he'd learned not to shout. There were interviews scheduled for a date that felt like a year away. There were pages to print and sign and scan, and Vicky's printer groaned and died with drama. So Andy walked to the little print shop that had reopened and stood exactly on the tape square, his document in his hand like a passport that didn't exist yet. When a woman at the social services office asked him why he wanted to adopt his stepdaughter, he thought about saying something big: destiny, love, the workings of God. He found himself saying, "Because I'm already here. I want my name to match what I've been doing." He had always had a quiet with him that people told him looked like confidence. He had, if he was honest, a fear that people calling him dad might be a trick someone smarter was playing on him. Signing meant nobody could take the trick back. It meant paperwork and a soft ring worn under his collar. The waiting pressed at them. The world kept not being normal. They made normal anyway. Andy built a bookshelf with Vicky one Saturday afternoon, and they nearly divorced twice during it, and then they put the planks against the wall, and Brooke lined her horses along the top. "Now they can see us," she said, an army guarding the room. At the end of July, a brown envelope arrived with 3 words stamped in brutal ink: "Further information required." Andy felt the panic rise fast and hot, not because they didn't have the information, but because he had never been asked for so much proof of what he'd been doing daily. Vicky caught him with her hands, brought him back to the table, spread the pages out like cards, and said, "We'll give them everything. You and me." One post from the video, buried among the nice ones, was not nice at all. A stranger with a profile picture of a car said, "Why would you take another man's child? Clout." Andy stared at it, baffled. He wanted to find the man and give him a sandwich and a nap and a different childhood. He did nothing. He went outside and sat on the front step, and the air smelled of sun-created dust, and he put his face in his hands. The sky did not crack to fix the mistake that was people not knowing how to be tender. A week later, another comment from a woman in Newcastle said, "My mum married a man who loved us like a job he was lucky to get. He saved my life every day and no one saw. I saw. Thank you for letting me say thank you here to a man I can't tag." Andy screenshot that one and kept it because it said clearly that this thing was not for cameras or algorithms. It was a stove that warmed a lot of cold houses if you didn't stand too far away. They decided to make a night of the waiting. Every Friday, they turned off the lights and lit candles and ate dinner on the living room floor like campers who had forgotten to bring a tent. They told stories of their days with laws, no adults allowed to speak for a child unless asked, no phones, no questions that were really corrections, no sentence had to be finished if the finish was less kind than the start. They got better at those rules. The boys were terrible at them and then, slowly, were less terrible. Brooke became a storyteller of such detail that sometimes it was midnight by the time they got to the end. On one of these Fridays, months after the T-shirt, but still before the courts learned to stand upright again, Brooke brought out the T-shirt from where she had hidden it clean and folded. She asked if she could wear it for dinner. "It's not adoption day," she said, preempting the adult correction she feared. "It's yes and when day, maybe we could celebrate them too." Vicky and Andy had looked at each other with that look that adults share when children teach them a thing and they pretend they knew it all along. "Yes," Andy said. "Wear it. You are always wearing the question in my head anyway." "I'm wearing the answer," she corrected, sentences like arrows now, not thrown but aimed kindly. "You answered. The letters just remind me." And he felt the back of his throat sting again because she had taken what could have been a wound, waiting, and made it into a badge. He had known men who turned waiting into a weapon. He had known women who turned waiting into a death. He was living in a house where the waiting became a song. Chapter 6, Waiting Rooms and Promises. Winter slid in, not so much across a calendar day as in the way the house started to hold the cold, and the windows offered up their white ghost smudges. The news made patterns of promise and retreat, like a tide that had decided it had more important work to do than follow the moon. They waited. They checked emails. They took a walk to the quarry and there was frost on the grass, and the bench had someone's scarf on it that had been there long enough to forget its owner. They played What You Love Most That Is Free, and Brooke said, "When you brush my hair gently and it doesn't hurt," and Vicky said, "The way you all breathe in the night," and Andy said, "The sound of your 3 laughs." He meant all 4, but Brooke knew her own was the one he loved the most because it had been a thing he had had to coax like a shy animal into the open. On a day in January when the sky was stopped with the kind of snow that never lands, they got the email. The hearing could be scheduled in March. It wasn't a steeple bell, but it rang in the house like a celebration. "March," Brooke said, the word a trampoline. "March and then April and then my birthday," and her mind built ladders of events to keep herself stable. She had learned to be an architect of time. Andy woke early on the day itself. He stood in the shower until the water was the beautiful side of too hot. He dressed like a man going to ask permission to do what he was already guilty of. He tied a tie he had owned since he was 18, and the wedding he had gone to then had ended in a fight. He was terrified. He could not tell you exactly why. He did not doubt the yes. He doubted something else, that he had somehow lied by letting them think he was better than he was. He had had angers. He had had days when he wanted to go silent for a week. He had had the urge to throw a plate and had put the plate down stubbornly, not beautifully. He had been more human than he wanted to be. He worried they would ask him about it and he would tell the truth. He hoped they did. Brooke wore the T-shirt under a cardigan that had birds on it. She also wore the daisy in her pocket. Vicky had told her not to bring it into the court because sometimes the past feels like a loud friend who talks over the judge. Brooke had nodded and put it in anyway. She had never been to a courtroom. She had seen one on TV that made it look like a church run by people in wigs. She did not know if she was supposed to be quiet or brave or both. She decided to be both. The room was not like the TV, it was harsher and nicer. Paperwork on a desk. A woman with glasses and a smile that had had to be grown back after years of using it on people who had forgotten what a child's hand felt like. Questions. Answers that were not rehearsed, but had been said 50 times in the kitchen over the months, and so came out steady because the truth had had practice. "Do you understand the permanence of this?" The judge asked gently, because a good judge asks gently and a bad judge says obviously and moves on. I do, Andy said, and his voice was a surprise to him, deep and certain. I understand I will be her father by law. I already am by life. The judge looked at Brooke, not at Vicky, not at Andy. And what do you think? She asked. Brooke stood on the bottom rung of a ladder of attention. She tilted her chin. I think it's the same as before, she said. Just more, like it's our name but with a bigger drawing. She gestured in the air, little artist. It's the same picture with more color. The judge smiled properly then, and out there clicked into place within here. Yes, the judge said. Let's do it, shall we? Vicky cried. Andy didn't, but only because he had cried in all the hours leading up and there wasn't much water left in the man. Brooke reached for Vicky's hand and then, without ceremony and maybe without thinking, she reached for Andy's too, and they made a small chain there at the table while someone with a pen made what had already been true into something irrevocably true. After, in the courtyard, people who had done this work long before the world had learned to clap stepped back and let the family be a family in the way that matters, alone together. Vicky laughed and cried and said, ice cream, like a vow. Corey and Charlie chased pigeons as if the birds were part of a religion they belonged to. Sapphire fell asleep on Andy's chest, all of her weight heavier because all of their hearts were lighter. Did you bring it? Brooke asked Andy. He looked blank for a second and then she rolled her eyes at him with affectionate impatience and said, the T-shirt. He grinned, reaching into the bag Vicky had packed with wipes and a spare dummy and an apple that had already been bitten 5 times by 3 people. He pulled out the shirt. It looked smaller now, like the world had grown around it. The letters were a little curled still, a little chipped at the corners. He held it up. You want to wear it? No, she said with dignity. I want you to keep it. For when I'm a teenager and mean sometimes and you need to remember I'm nice. He laughed, unexpected and whole. Deal. They walked to the quarry because the day deserved the river, and the river deserved them. The tulips were starting, and the sky had that bleached look that English skies wear when they're not sure if they'll keep their clothes on. Brooke saw a daisy and picked it because she is made of circles, because we are all made of our own beginnings and we are all more than that. She pressed it into Andy's palm like a note. What does it say? He asked, voice thick. It says thanks, she said, and sorry it took ages, and also sorry it will sometimes still be hard, and also we're here. He looked at Vicky over Brooke's head, and Vicky looked at him, and it was not a vow in the eyes, and it was not a story, and it was not a movie. It was 2 tired people who had chosen each other, and therefore had chosen everything else that came with the other, including the hard and the exhilarating and the grocery lists, and the courtrooms and the nights when the baby won't sleep, and the afternoons when the 7-year-old lets you be saved by a shirt. Epilogue, paperwork and petals. Some stories end with a kiss, and some with a wedding, and some with a heroic dash through the rain to the station. This one ends with laundry, because life does. Andy took the T-shirt home and washed it on gentle with the whites, because love is knowing which setting. He dried it on the radiator, and it smelled like soap in the house. He folded it and put it in a memory box that had once held shoes. He slid inside next to it, the daisy, pressed again between pages of a book that had been very honest about how hard love is. Sometimes at night, on the Fridays when they still turned off the lights and made the living room a country they'd invented between them, Brooke would take the T-shirt out and press it to her chest. She didn't need to wear it anymore. The letters were in the marrow of the house. But it pleased her, like reading a good book again and recognizing the paragraphs you underlined when you were a different self. Do you ever think you'll be tired of me? She asked once, because children will hand you their most terrible questions in the middle of washing up, as if the empty pan could hold the fear and be rinsed of it. Every day, he said, deadpan, and she giggled because that is a proper joke. Then he went serious in the way he rarely did, and she understood it meant listen. No, he said simply. I will be tired because life is heavy sometimes, but I will be never tired of you. You can wake me at 3 a.m. when you're 13, and I'll be cross at the weather and the clock and the existence of humanity, but I will be thrilled to be woken by you. She put her head on his shoulder. Even if I do the thing where I slam my door. Especially then, he said, because any door you slam between us I've already taken off its hinges. You can't say that to a judge, she giggled. I said worse, he said, and she knew he was joking because he was good at only being serious when it counted. Once, when the house was quiet, not often, but once, Vicky asked him if he had wanted to be adopted as a child. He thought of his mother, who had adopted no one with papers, but had adopted him with a ferocity that had kept him from falling through a hole big enough to lose a person in. He thought of the men who had come in and out like weather. He thought of his own name and how it had sat on him like a shirt that didn't quite fit until it did, more from wearing it in than from any change in cotton. "I wanted someone to ask," he said, honest and surprised at his own honesty. "I wanted someone to say, you are mine, no question mark. My mum did that as best she could with money and time and art. And I guess I wanted the question this time because the question is a gift when it is asked by someone brave." "You handled it," Vicky said, "because praise is a gift and used too little. The way you always do, by being still." "I nearly fainted into the baked beans," he admitted, and she laughed the laugh that had made him love her by a shelf of cereal boxes in Asda. On her 8th birthday, Brooke signed her name on a picture she drew for her adoptive father. She spelled it the way she spelled it in her head, and there was a hyphen where there hadn't been before. She had decided not to be one thing or the other. "It's my name," she told her mum, not defensive but certain, "and it's our name. I am more, so my name is more." "Tell that to the teacher gently," Vicky advised, practical even in poetry, "or we'll never get your PE kit back." Then the real quiet shock, months after the paperwork, when the day was just a day and the sun was fidgeting in an ordinary sky, Brooke fell on the step and skinned her knee and shouted, "Dad." Andy came before he realized his body was moving. The word didn't hang like a bell he had to point to. It was a coin thrown casually into the fountain of the day. He cleaned the grays. He kissed the head that smelled of summer and biscuits and whatever shampoo was cheapest this week. And he tucked her hair behind her ear and said, "You're all right," in a voice that wasn't learned in a court or a comment section. It was in him from long before, from the day he was a boy and wanted to be told precisely that thing and wasn't. And in saying it now, he was both father and son, and he forgave some things and couldn't forgive others, and he let that be, because being a person is untidy. There are people who think family is a bloodline you trace with a pen. There are people who think it is a house you can stand in and point to. And there are those who know the truth, that it is a thread, passed through the needle of a minute, then another, then another. Sometimes it pricks, sometimes the cloth bunches, sometimes you have to pick it out and start again. But if you are brave, and if you know when to ask and when to wait, you can make something that lasts so long it seems to have always been there. A shirt with wonky letters, a yes said quietly, a child with a daisy in her pocket, and a door she can slam without fear. On the summer day a year after the zipper, they took a photo on the steps of the house. They didn't post it. They kept it, because not everything has to be seen to be real. The 4 children were all taller and somehow exactly the same. Vicky's hair was different because women are magic. Andy's eyes had a softness they didn't before, like glass that has been smoothed by the sea. Brooke held the t-shirt, ironed and creased and powerful as ever, not because of the letters, not because of the day, but because of what it asked and what was answered. "Will you?" He had said yes, over and over. Every day since. He would say it again tomorrow if the world asked, and he would say it with the shameless, finally not afraid tears of a man who knows what it cost to ask and what it gave to answer. This is the story of a girl who revealed a t-shirt and a man who understood it was a door. This is a house built of wanting and staying, the long mistake of the world redressed by small acts. It is a father found not in the lines of a face, but in the lines at the bottom of a card that said, "P.S. Look at me after reading the card." And when he did, it turned out she had been looking at him all along.